What is up, everybody? It's your buddy, Mr. Carley here, and I am going to go through a sample IA and talk a little bit about the writing style, the structure, some things to be aware of, some things that are good, some things that are maybe not so good or could be made better. So I'm recording my screen right now. First thing, really quickly, is we want to kind of move myself out of the way here. Perfect. We want to have or make sure that we are somewhere in this area. 10 to 12 is going to be good. So I got the little scaffolding here for you. You want to set the scene and kind of talk about the context, summarize possibly different historical perspectives, and then outline how the essay is structured. If you do the thesis format, that will be good, but you don't need to do the thesis format. You just need to have a general kind of second tier thesis, not too broad, but not too specific. Something that, we know kind of where things are going, but we also need a little more information. And conclusions, kind of same thing, but the body is where we're going to be talking about our evidence, and we really want to focus on our organization. So as long as we have our topic sentences set up well, things generally will be pretty straightforward and will move pretty well. So let's take a look at this one. This one is one of the samples I pulled from the IU website. It says, to what extent was the British Army responsible for Bloody Sunday in January 1972? So that is a to what extent question, which means, can I draw on this? Okay, hang on. I want this so I can draw on it. Give me a second there. Here's the sample. We're going to open it with Microsoft Edge because that is the only thing Microsoft Edge is good for, which is writing on things. All right, cool. Oh, it'll read aloud to you too. How do you like that? Anywho, all right, so this is a to what extent question, which means we're going to even, come on. We're either going to have to talk about it was a little, it was a lot, it was mostly their fault, mostly not their fault, but there's got to be perspective in here. Definitely, there always needs to be perspective in your IA, but there definitely needs to be this. So if you're going to have a to what extent question, make sure you answer the dang to what extent question. So blah, 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 we'll move through his identification or her or their identification of sources, and so forth. All right, investigation. So what we want to know is in the first paragraph, we want an argumentative thesis that takes a stance on the prompt. Okay. So we got a little bit of context here. Violence between Catholics and Protestants in Northern Ireland escalated in 1972. Here's what happened. The British Army had been deployed to disperse the march. However, some protesters threw stones. Okay, very narrative, but it's setting the scene, giving us some context. Within 30 minutes of the disturbance, soldiers had opened fire. The shootings had a devastating impact on relations between the army and nationalist community. Okay, cool. Many contemporaries blamed the British Army for the tragedy. However, the British government also played a significant role, as did the IRA in the events of Bloody Sunday. All right, there she is right there, my friends. There's the thesis. So by contemporaries, they're talking about historians, but they're basically saying that people blame the British Army. However, the British government also plays a significant role, and the IRA, or the Ireland Republican Army, I believe, also played a role. Okay, that's cool. What I would really like to see is one more therefore that answers the extent question, because they didn't really do that in the thesis. And that's not going to really necessarily take away a whole lot from you, but it's going to make it a whole lot more clear and a much closer to getting at least a 10, but probably up in that 13, 15 range. You can say, therefore, the British Army was mostly to blame. And also, this thesis itself doesn't tell us about what the role was. So it doesn't really give us a whole lot about like where we're going. So that's important too. Not the greatest of thesis statements, but it is there. Okay. All right. So now what we're looking for is, again, we want some topic sentences. We want some organization. So this should be their A point right here if they did this well. So this should be something about the British Army. That was first in their thesis. It's nice to have that come first later on. So they said the British Army could be held responsible for the bloodshed of Bloody Sunday. All right, nice. That's a topic sentence. It's more of like a, I don't know, a heading, to be honest. You can make that a heading or a header in your essay, but I think the topic sentence is right here, though. It says the military was aware of the plan for a march and had prepared methods to control it on the 10th of January. So I think that's kind of what this is going to be about right here, is going to be how the British Army attempted to control this and how that led to the event. Okay, that gives me a signpost of where I'm going. This is good. This would be the main idea or the topic sentence. Okay, if you're using Melcon, it's going to be the main idea. Topic sentence, same thing. So paratroopers. So we've got some evidence here about the paratroopers. President's heightened tensions. Okay, so now they're kind of making a secondary claim about that evidence. So they're talking about how the presence of the paratroopers actually made tensions worse. Then it's got a little more information about the event. So they sealed off the original route. They had attempted to redirect them towards national China, blah, blah, blah. Operation Forecast. Nice. The arrest force were to conduct scoop up operations of as many hooligans and rioters as possible. All right, so here we have a whole lot of evidence. So this is where you're using the historical story. All of its narrative, it's just telling me what happened until they make some kind of connection back to what their thesis. Usually the word thus is a good indicator that's happening. So let's see what it says. It says, thus the Army deemed it necessary to be proactive. When Operation Forecast was outlined to Parliament, Chief Superintendent Lagan was stunned to hear the target for arrest at the event was 500 people. British commander General Ford was recorded stating that his forces aimed to prevent the march from occurring at all, and that they had hoped to capitalize on the hooligans or to seize them. Okay, I can kind of see where they're going here. So this is kind of like more evidence. It is still historical evidence, but there is a little bit of analysis, or what they would call in the Melcon term that I showed you on Friday, the link to the thesis statement. A little bit there. They kind of go on. Then they kind of break it down into what the Army was claiming happened, and they're finally at the end. It says, therefore, the Army had planned to prevent the march, arrested a large number of Catholics, and encouraged troops to take a proactive approach. Okay, so that's right there what we would call the link back to the thesis or the topic sentence. So if I'm reading this for the first time, I don't have a huge problem with this. I think that there's a lot of like narrating events with not a lot of commentary put into it about like how it relates to the thesis or the topic sentence. Part of that's because the thesis was a little weak and didn't really clarify that for us. But there's nothing like inherently wrong with this. It's kind of like a lot of lead up to then a little itty bitty link right there. So just something to keep in mind is when you give a couple examples in a paragraph, make sure you're tying them back and putting in your own thoughts. Also, none of this evidence is analyzed critically. They don't talk about like where it comes from or anything like that. It seems like a lot of it is just narrative in general. So it's not the greatest example, but it kind of does the job that it needs to do at this point. So then they're moving on. They got a little, however, the British government can also be seen as responsible. Again, this isn't so much a topic sentence or a main idea as it is kind of like a header. So now we're getting into the British government. But again, that's key for organization. So this is like what we would call our B idea. Again, when you do your checkpoint 1, I'm looking for your A. Look at how this is like one paragraph. It's like one big meaty paragraph. That's all we're really looking for. It could be more than one. In fact, if you're going to use different evidence and different perspectives, that might be a good idea. But that's all we're really looking at is kind of one or two meaty paragraphs. So going on, says, however, the British government can also be, let me check my time quick, I'm sorry. Oh yeah, we got time. Can also be responsible for the tragedy. Irish civilians believe the army was used by the government tool of aggression. Okay, again, they kind of follow this pattern of having like a little header, and then this is, to me, is like the main idea right here, that the civilians believe the army was being used by the government to be aggressive, so that the government was actually behind it. That's their argument. So again, we have actually some background, some context. It says between 1969 and 1972, the Troubles had claimed about 200 lives. The British government was determined to regain control. The government had authorized the army to assert its authority. The British government used the violence as a pretext for deploying troops. Okay, good. So this is kind of good. I feel like they're doing a little bit better job here of having evidence and then linking it. So it kind of all comes back to here are the reasons why the Irish people would think that the government was behind this. So this is a good example of E/L, or evidence and links to the thesis. Yeah. This makes sense because it seems like they were leading with maybe what they think was like the least likely scenario and kind of getting more into what they think their other ideas are. So this A idea might actually be more of like an X from my thesis format. Spoiler, return to violence. The British government used the escalating act of terror to increase. Okay, this might be a good time to like make a new paragraph. These paragraphs are huge. So this is like a new idea that the British government's going to use the escalating acts of terror to increase the number of troops deployed in the region. And then they kind of talk about that and what some of the repercussions were for it. Again, we've got evidence. Moreover, the Widgery report, April 1972, which exonerated the British government, is questionable. Okay, good. Now we're kind of questioning the evidence a little bit. Furthermore, historian P.J. Taylor suggests that the original statements produced by commanders and soldiers had enough evidence to support charges of murder. Yeah, so this one's a better example of giving like some nuance. You've got some perspective in here as well. You got different historians they talk about and different ways of looking at it, evaluating evidence. But we got this main idea about how the British government was used escalating acts of terror to increase troop levels and was really behind the Bloody Sunday massacres. And then finally, we've got our idea C, or our B if you're going X, therefore A, or however A and B. So nevertheless, the Irish Republican Army has also been held responsible. Again, this is a header. So the paratroopers believed the IRA had orchestrated street disorders. So I might just clean this up and be like, okay, how were they responsible? How am I going to argue that? That they were causing disruptions actively? That might be a little bit better. So again, giving specific accounts. Desperate stewards had appealed for peace, but more debris was thrown later on the day. Shootings, officials found a counter-sniping position. Again, evidence. Official inquiries, evidence indicated. Yeah. So again, this is here's a little bit of analysis. The thus kind of gives away. So thus the IRA deliberately provoked the British military during the march, calculate attempt to gain support, and then goes on to have more evidence and more evidence. So they're kind of interspersing their own thoughts within there, which is what you want. It says, in conclusion, it seems clear that the British government aimed to regain control of Northern Ireland and had used the army as a means of control to counteract the Irish Republic Army's aggression. There's also evidence that the British Army anticipated the IRA violence during the march and were ready to act proactively. Although there was a degree of provocation from the IRA, the army overreacted and was ultimately responsible. Okay. So now they finally, like, this is the extent, right? They finally got to it in the conclusion, which is nice. But I don't know if that's what they argued. It seemed like they're saying that the army overreacted and was ultimately responsible. It seemed like, from what I read just briefly there, that they're arguing that the government was more responsible. So I don't know why they ended with that conclusion. So, but if you look at this, they do have, let's go down to their bibliography. Also, it should be called a bibliography. I don't know why they're calling it a works cited. But they've got a lot of different examples of evidence. Actually, it goes on. Yeah, they have a lot, probably more than they really needed. I'm wondering how much they actually used of all of this. But they got a lot of different evidence. They cite specific historians. If you look, they've got their footnotes here, which are set up well. So if I look at the rubric here, where I'm looking at, was it organized? The first thing I'm going to think about is, was it organized? And I know what they're arguing. And I would say yes. So I would say that they probably are at least here, but they're probably up here. It says it's generally clear and well organized, although there may be some repetition or lack of clarity. I think the thesis was kind of unclear at the beginning. I got to hurry up. Let's see. Critical analysis. Analysis kind of does lack development. That's true. But they do add in their own critical evidence and they question the sources. There's awareness and evaluation of different perspectives. So I would probably give this a 12. Let me go look at the criteria, see how we did. Ready? The moderator who moderates this says 12 out of 15, baby. Investigation is generally clear, organized, evidence from a range of sources. There's awareness, some evaluation of perspectives, which are not clearly reflected in the conclusion. Bingo!